the first question I've got for you is, what does science mean to you?
I think science to me means being interested in life, really. I mean, that sounds a bit grand, but it's what makes us, who we are. Investigating that, a source of constant, wonder and interest. Really, it's never boring, and really, for me personally, trying to find out what influences our health.
Yeah, that's really, it's true. It's always changing. It's always evolving. So, what's your favourite science moment that you've had in your career?
That's a tricky one, actually. There's quite a few, I would say, but I think one thing that stands out for me probably was when we received the first results on the genetics underlying endometriosis, and we saw those results. I mean, that was a long process of, it was basically the first time I led a large collaborative study, that I'd received funding for, etc. So to start at the start of an independent career, that was very important. But then to see those results first coming in and seeing that, there actually were signals there that we could actually do something with was very, very exciting. So I remember that very, very clearly.
Yeah, it's a good one. So is there a particular woman in science who has inspired you?
I think so. So looking back at my sort of training and career, a lot of my mentors were men that I worked with. Certainly, there are two women that stand out who was supervisors. One was Simone Buitendijk, who's a Dutch perinatal epidemiologist, who is currently actually the Vice Chancellor of the University of Leeds.
Oh.
But I worked with her on one of my very first projects as part of my first degree in biomedical sciences, and she is the first epidemiology project I did, and she was very, she was passionate about what she did, and she clearly worked in women's health, which is something I ended up working in myself, of course. And she taught me a lot. I think she taught me tenacity, and she taught me sort of interest and passion in what you do. And that really, the world is your oyster, and you should just, go and do what you're most interested in. So yes, I'm still in touch with her. And she's now also obviously in the UK, so that's interesting. The other person was my co-supervisor on my DPhil. Which is Pat Yudkin, who's a statistician. She's now retired. But again, she was someone who I felt was sort of a trailblazer in the field, and someone I learned a lot from.
No, I think I'm very fortunate to have lots of women that I can look up to, and I think it's great when we have women that we can look up to in these roles. Yeah. So, what does being a woman in science now mean to you?
I think it's vitally important to have women in science, clearly. Diversity in general is incredibly important. I think to move science forward, to move scientific discovery forward, is a team effort. And the more diverse opinions, ideas, thought processes you have in that process is what makes science exciting, and how you move and shape things, essentially. So yes, women should be as well represented as men are, clearly.
I obviously agree.
How would you say that the landscape of women in science has changed?
Well, I think, a key factor, of course, is that there are a lot more women now that are female role models in science, and I think that's really important. Because I think in order for us to inspire that, women and girls, up and coming, they need to have role models to look up to and see. So I think that's important. Clearly the sort of more traditional glass ceilings that were there a few decades ago are disappearing, and I think that's clearly a really, really positive positive development. I think it's much more accepted probably as well. This is from, I guess, partly personal experience, but also seeing my peers that, in science is actually really very possible to combine, a scientific career with family life, for example. So I think that's something that's probably changed quite a bit from, again, a number of decades ago, where there was almost women and men almost had to make a choice, between that. And I think that it's very noticeable now that there's lots of very successful women in scientific leadership positions who have families and who manage to combine, family with a scientific career very well.
Yeah. So how would you like to see it change, the landscape of women in science in the future?
So I think, I think that flexibility that I mentioned is really important. I think, to stress that is there. I think what still we probably need to work on is kind of the sense of security in scientific roles and scientific jobs, because I think that's probably one of the reasons why perhaps a disproportionate number of women leave science for jobs that simply, provide more job security than a scientific career does. I mean, clearly that doesn't only apply to women. I mean, there's plenty of men who leave for that exact same reason as well. But I think if we try and fix that, we'll do better. And then I think just keeping to working on mentorship for women and men, but to take on sort of leadership roles, leadership positions, starting your own group, etc., and having that confidence. But I think all of that goes hand in hand. I think when you have more female role models around, it becomes more the norm as well, to have that ambition. So, I think those are the kind of things we should probably work on.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to women and girls who are curious about science?
Oh, well, stay curious and follow your passion. I think that's important. Talk to other women who have gone before you and what their experiences are like, if they have any advice. And keep educating yourself, I think, and don't feel inhibited in any way. So I think that's a really important part of it. So go for it, essentially.
Yeah. So I'll just have some other questions because we've got a bit of time, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
So what made you pursue a career in science?
So I was always interested in, even at school I was interested in biology, for example. So I was always interested in human health. I hesitated between going to medical school and becoming a doctor and doing a sort of scientific degree, and ultimately decided to go for the scientific career. Now, in hindsight, of course, one could easily do a medical degree first and then embark on a scientific career, which is what plenty of people do. But I think I made that choice sort of fairly early on. It sort of moved on from there. I guess I've just always followed what I'm interested in, really. I think that's the key thing. I haven't worried an awful lot about what might be the right job. It's more what I would, find the job that interested me most. So yeah.
Which achievement do you look at and think, I'd love to go back in time and tell the younger me that was possible?
I think almost every sort of new leadership position I have obtained, I would highlight that to my younger self. I mean, clearly becoming head of department is something that I would have foreseen even 10 years ago, probably. Yeah, it's I don't know if many people do, but ultimately, I guess the message is kind of dream big and take the opportunities that arise ultimately and the challenges that arise. But yes, I think that that is something I probably would not have seen.
And then, what has been your least favourite science moment?
Well, I guess this goes back to, follow what you're passionate about. So my first degree was in biomedical sciences, and a large proportion of that was lab work. There will be many people in our department who are passionate about lab work. I wasn't so much, and for me that had to do with the fact that I would be working on an experiment for a couple of days, and then in the end it all went wrong, and I wouldn't really know what went wrong, and would have to start all over again. Whereas I just quickly discovered with epidemiology, which is what I trained in, you could write some computer programs and you could rerun things and see where things went wrong. So to me, that was, intuitively, a more attractive way of doing things. But I think it's all about finding out what interests you most and what makes you tick, basically. So, I think that's important.
So, how would you like to see the landscape of women in science change?
I think what I'd like to see is that women are represented really at all levels in science and scientific careers, and that for that to become the norm, really. And that includes clearly also scientific leadership positions. So ultimately, I think what we need to see is that will then also translate in equal numbers of Nobel Prizes going to women as well as men.
Yes. No, that's a great answer, yes.